Tom Schwab, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to have you with me here today.
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so you shared a fascinating paper napkin with me, and I'm really looking forward to diving in. And it says in red and in block letters to make your point clear, one conversation, and underneath conversation has funnel. So one funnel crossed out above that, replaced with conversation away, exclamation point. Why did you share that with me?
I wish it would have been a bigger napkin because that's like the biggest thing that I'm yelling right now is that everybody's talking about this one funnel away, right? Just everything, just you just have to have a funnel. And I've looked at my life and everything good has come through a conversation. And I think that's so powerful that sometimes we're getting so involved in the automation and dehumanizing people into leads and numbers and visitors. It's like, no, they're people. And conversations is what moves us forward, right? We can have conversations that ChatGPT and AI can't. And it's those meaningful conversations that make for a rich life and a profitable business.
What I really think is interesting is you said one conversation away and not one relationship away. And I think that's interesting because you're focused on the lead of that, right? The lead of it is really meeting people, isn't it?
Yeah, that's interesting. One relationship away. I could see that too, but I think it all starts with a conversation, right? And sometimes the conversations don't lead to a relationship, but they're still powerful, right? That conversation that exposes you to a different idea or a different person, right? The example that I love to use is, you know, the conversation, right? That how I was introduced to my bride, right? I didn't make the perfect funnel and, do Facebook advertising to, a billion eligible women, right? No, I had a conversation and one of my friends who knew Karen, introduced us and we went for a run, the three of us, and we got to talk on that. And it was the conversation that did that. And as I look through my life, all of the great things have come through conversations. Now, some of the times the conversations could be new ideas through a podcast or a book, something like that. But I think it is that idea that what makes us humans is the conversations and that relationships, as you said, are so important, but those are all built on conversations.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about what you said about Karen and how you met her, your wife, was you had a conversation with somebody who also knew her and then put the two of you together. And
Mhm.
that's what happens in conversations, right? That's when you're actually interested in what's going on, connections are being formed all around you and not necessarily even just directly.
Yeah. And one of the things I love, you don't have on the podcast here, there's not a set format where you come in with, hey, here's 12 questions that I'm going to ask you. That's not a conversation, right? That's an interview or a script, right? If I was applying for the busboy job at the restaurant, all right, that's an interview. Ask me the 12 questions. But the conversations are powerful because both parties come into it wanting to share, wanting to learn, and the magic happens from that conversation.
So how important is it? So you talked about both parties coming to the table, wanting to share and wanting to learn. Now you can't control somebody else. What are some of the things that you do to make sure that you go into the conversation wanting to share, wanting to learn, like with the right intention? What do you do?
Yeah, and that's great. It's like setting that intention beforehand. So is this being on a podcast? Is that a conversation? Well, if somebody's listening to me, I'm in their ears. But I always set that intention of I'm here to bring value, right? I'm here to share what I know, what's what I have learned throughout my life and my viewpoints on that. I'm not here to argue with somebody whether or not they're right or they're wrong. And here to share what I know, but also be open to what other people know.
Yeah, yeah, and in doing that, when we come to share, we come to learn. And if we're coming into something as a student, I think there's a lot of value there automatically, isn't there?
There is. And one of the themes that has been so powerful in my life. And when we were talking about what the napkin wisdom is, I could have flipped that napkin over and I would have thought, oh, maybe I'll write this. The other one is, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others, right? We all underestimate what we know and overestimate what other people know. And so bringing that to the conversation of knowing that I have something through my knowledge, my expertise, my life experience that I can add to this, and knowing that other person has a viewpoint that I can learn from. Um, it's like that whole thing of I do mentoring through the entrepreneurs organization, and people say, "Well, why do you do it?" Because I learn more than I teach, right? Because the questions that these young entrepreneurs are asking are ones that I need to be asking myself.
Yeah, it's so important to understand that in teaching we learn. I mean, my mom used to, mom wisdom. My mom used to always say, "Hey, you want to learn something? Teach it to somebody else." And that's a really great way to break it down. And isn't that sort of what you're saying here? That if you come to give value, you have to understand the value, and you end up understanding the value through someone else's eyes too.
Yeah. And it's, you said, what do you do? I think it's intention, right?
Mm,
And you can sort of see that with people's conversations, right? The people that walk up and they're there to sell you something, right?
mm.
And the conversation is short and it doesn't work well. And then there's other conversations that are interesting. They challenge you to look at the world in a different way, right? And you're like, that was a great conversation. I want to listen more on that, or I want to continue that conversation again. And I think of one of our clients, Bix Bixon. He said that most people don't have a future; they just have an extenuation of the past. Whatever I did yesterday, I'll do tomorrow. Right. My New Year's resolution is to do 10% more of this, 5% less of that. That's not a future. It's a continuation of the past. And he said, a future is when you have a vision of something and then you have the conversations that draw you to that. And to me, that's what a conversation is.
So, so when you're having a conversation, I love this idea of having a vision for something, right? How does that play out in that but you're not preordaining the conversation to go a certain way by having a vision for the conversation, right? You're more having a vision for discovery or a vision of an open door, not necessarily you're not painting all the walls and making that super clear, are you?
No, and I think your point there of having an intention and some framework behind it, right? If it's just two random people getting together and having a conversation, well, it's awkward at the beginning. It's like, I start talking about football and you start talking about soccer, right? And there's that disconnect there. And so to know, why are we here? What are we trying to do? What commonalities do we have? Because one of the things is, you can't say enough of the right things to the wrong people. So, make sure you're in the right audience there.
Yeah.
Yeah, making sure you've got the conversation there.
I like that. Can't say enough the wrong things to the wrong people. I want to go back to this idea of funnels and automation, right? Because that's everybody is talking about funnels and automation, funnels and automation. Today, I was talking to my, I was at the gym, I was talking to my trainer, and he was saying to me, you know what's funny is all through life, people are talking about all this automation stuff. It's really just about your contacts. And I didn't know that we were going to go here that quickly in our conversation today, but it's really the same thing. It's all about just nurturing our contacts. He said it used to be a mail list, now it's an email list, and you know what? It's still just a contact list, isn't it? It's still just about the connections and the conversations.
Yeah, what you said before, relationships, right?
Right.
Can you have a relationship without a conversation, right? And so sometimes people will have an email list, right? How big's your email list? Or, I've got a 500,000 followers on Instagram. Really? is there really a 500,000 people that follow you, or are they bots? What is that, right? Have you ever had a conversation with them? If you were broken down on a highway, right? If I'm driving through Canada or you're driving through Michigan, right? We've had a conversation. We've got a relationship. If you call and say, "Hey, I'm broken down," all right, I'll be right there. That's a conversation. That's a relationship. Just having a contact isn't. And it's like sometimes people will buy email lists, right? And
Mhm.
oh, great, now I've got 50,000 people that I can email, cold email. How effective is that going to be, right? I ask people this a lot of times, like, when was the last time you bought something that was a big purchase, a big relationship, right? I'm not picking the cancer surgeon to save my child's life because I saw him on a bus stop, right? Or because he did a TikTok dance, or I got a cold email from him. It's like, no, that's a relationship. I'm probably having a conversation with somebody that I know and say, who's the best, right?
Yeah. So you talked about, a million, half a million followers on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And those are real vanity metrics, right? People get really caught up in these vanity metrics that aren't the same thing as profit metrics. You wouldn't count them in the same way, would you?
No, it's like, what are you optimizing for?
Yeah.
Right? Are you optimizing for profits, or are you optimizing for contacts? Are you optimizing for leads, right? Every day I get emails. Hey, we can get you more leads. We can get you, 10 conversations with your ideal prospects a day. It's like, no, I want more profits, right? And that comes from ideal clients that value what you do. So it's not just the activity there. And as you said, the vanity metric there, I'm like, I had to think of my own LinkedIn, right? I've got 14, I think it's 14,000 contacts on LinkedIn. Are they relationships? No. All right. Every now and then I'll get somebody that says, "Hey, I see that you're connected with so and so on LinkedIn. Could you give me an introduction?" Well, if I know both people, I am thrilled to give an introduction. I love to do that. But I got to say, the vast majority of them on there, it's like we're connected, but I really don't know who they are. I go through the messages and my records, and it's like, yeah, we've never had a connection. So we're connected, but we don't have a relationship.
But to your point, you're actually check when you're going back and looking at it, did I ever have a conversation with that person?
Yes,
That's the metric. That's the metric that we measure for whether or not we're even going to introduce somebody to somebody else, right? Even if somebody's reaching out, like if we're just connected for the first time and I'm reaching out to you, Tom, and I say, "Hey, can you introduce me to so and so?" and we've never had a conversation, how likely are you to connect us? Zero,
true.
right? Right. So isn't it true that, if we really look at it, vanity metrics are really distracting because they create a lot of noise, right? I mean, these are people who are just creating noise just by that example that you gave me.
Yes, and once again, I learned so much from our clients. There was one that pointed out to me that we've moved beyond the attention economy to the trust economy. And I think it's true, right? I used to say that your biggest problem in the world was obscurity. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore, right? I had to rethink of this because it used to be, well, people would work with you if they only knew you, right?
Mm.
So how can we get their attention? And you've seen people doing this, and it's like buying followers, being on social media. And it's like, no, is it that they know you, or is it that they trust you? Right. And I think especially um, the higher the level of the engagement, the more important it is. Right. So if you're cutting my lawn, I saw your truck drive by. Yeah, you can cut the lawn. But we had a client that came to us and I said, "Well, why do you want to do podcast interviews?" And I loved his answer. He said, "Because I think the vast majority of digital marketing is like advertising above a urinal." And I was like, "What?" You got to explain that. And he's like, "Well, I'm a high level, consultant, right? my clients are in front of urinals, but I don't want to be seen there. And he's like, I don't want to be seen on the park bench. I don't want to be seen on the billboard, right? Is the best lawyer in town the one that's on the side of the buses and the billboards and everything? Probably not, right? So he only wanted to be seen where it helped the authority there, right? So it's like that whole thing of, do you want to be known or do you want to be trusted? And are you optimizing for leads and attention, or are you optimizing, like you said, for trust and profits? I think it's an interesting conversation to have. And the other problem too is that there's a lot of industries out there that are trying to get us to spend more time and more money for attention.
Yeah, I mean that's what they're monetizing. They're monetizing attention, and we are helping them do that. Um, what when you said everything good has come through conversation. You know, you said that earlier on, and when you said it when I asked you about your napkin, is this something that you had to remind yourself of? Is did you fall off the path and get caught up in the funnels and the top of the funnels and packing more in? And how did that look like?
I wish I could say I did it once, right?
Mm,
I've done it multiple times, right? One of the great things about God is that if you don't learn from a lesson, He'll keep giving you the lesson. And I can remember doing it multiple times. It's like, oh yeah, more is better, right? So I'll just keep doing this. At one time, my last company was an e-commerce company, and I finally did a blog that called it my pay-per-click addiction, right? Yeah, you can buy a little bit of traffic, but to get the same hit the next day, you got to buy a little bit more, and it never works quite as well, and you're never quite as happy. So that was one where I tried to do, more attention. Uh, Interview Valet has been around for a decade, right? We have tried everything, right? I got to admit that we tried cold email for a quarter, right? And everybody else was saying it worked. Did we get leads from it? Yes, we got activity, but they didn't turn into clients, right? I wasted their time and our time with that. Um, Even to the idea of, I look at it and say, you know, people are like, well, you should do all this social media. It's like, well, if I'm doing social media, aren't I just saying that I'm proving that podcast interview marketing doesn't work? And we get 70% of our clients from people that have heard me on podcast interviews. The other 30 come from referrals, right? So I look at that, it's like, is it scalable? I don't know, but it works, right? All the good things are coming through conversations, not through all of this automation.
yeah,
And I'm an engineer, so I understand the automation, but I also am a business owner and understand what's working.
yeah. And when you think about I don't know if you've read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear,
Yeah.
but one of the things he talks about is how we build habits, right? In the early stages of the books, and he says that we get something from the activity, even if it's not a good one. So one of the examples that he gives is, you know, you get a roadblock at work, and what do you do about the roadblock? You get frustrated, you sort of lose momentum in the work, and then what do? You go to social media and feel better because you're distracted. And what do? You associate going to social media and feeling better with a roadblock at work. And that's how the habit sort of gets built and then reinforced because you found something good about getting stuck. And that pattern just sort of perpetuates and perpetuates. And then you'll always end up stuck. So I like this idea of the pay-per-click addiction because we get caught in these habits that we think are doing something, but we're just building noise. How important is it in a business context? I'm not talking about in every context, but I'm talking about in a business context. How important is it to measure the value of your conversations, right? Like, is it important, or is it just important to always just be giving and curious?
That's interesting. Um,
Because someone
there's
out
the
there is out there saying, that's all really nice, Tom, but you know, I don't have all that time.
Okay. I would push back and say, Are you trying to close a transaction or build a business? Both of them are important, but they're not the same thing, right? Just chasing a transaction, that'll put some money in the bank today, but that's not the same thing as building a business, right? Building a business comes from long-term referrals, happy clients, not just trying to churn new clients in. I think when you were talking about that, we get this addiction to data also. And I'll give Rand Fishkin from SEO Moz. He's the first one I heard this story from. He's like the one of the big thought leaders in SEO. He's got a new company now called Spark Toro that's amazing. But he gives the example. He's like, if he was at a conference talking, right, and somebody heard him, and they're like, "Oh, I want to work with him." They misspelled his name, but Google got him to the right place. Google would come back and say, "We brought you that traffic," right? And then what if the person got distracted and they left, but because of Facebook retargeting, they were brought back and then they made the sale, right? They're going to come back and Facebook's going to say, "We brought that sale to you." Well, the truth is that all of it was important and none of it would have happened if somebody didn't hear him speak at that live event. And so his point is if you want everything perfectly attributed, right? If you want perfect analytics on everything, then you better stop public speaking. You better stop, digital speaking. You better stop billboards, definitely, right? You should stop newspaper advertisements, right? Because you can't attribute those. Heck, you should definitely not support the little league baseball team that has your local company's name on it because there's no attribution on that. But in your heart, these things work for me, right? When I go and have the conversations with the right people, it drives that. And I really think it's the difference between that long-term perspective or that short-term dopamine hit, like you said there.
Yeah, so Rand was on Paper Napkin Wisdom a while ago, and he shared something similar in his time, and I think that's really important that people need to understand. There's a big difference between closing a transaction and building a business. And if you're in the mode of closing transactions, closing transactions, closing transactions, that's where you're going to stay stuck. You've got to pivot to building a business, and that means relationships. That means understanding what your clients need. That means the first thing you said when building a business, the first thing out of your mouth was long-term referrals, and that's how you got your wife. It was a referral. So it works everywhere, doesn't it?
Um, no. And I'm going to be devil's advocate on this one because too
Okay.
often people will say, well, Elon Musk says that I have to do this, or Mark Zuckerberg says I have to do this. Could you scale up Google right now on referrals? Probably not, right? Could you um, scale up the Boring Company or SpaceX on referrals? Probably not, right? But most of us aren't doing that business, right? What we could get from referrals would 10x our business, right? And that's something that's all within our control, right? So we got to figure out where we are, what's the most valuable client that we have, right? I think most people would say referrals tend to close faster for a higher amount, churn less, right? But yet they know that's their best client, but they'll go after cold email, right?
Mhm.
Because it's scalable. Well, you don't need to be scalable right now. You need to get to seven figures or go to eight figures, maybe even nine figures, right? Once you be on nine figures, then let's talk about how to really, really scale, which is different things.
So let's go back to another fear that I think some people are having. They'll be out there and say, "Oh, it's really nice for Govin and Tom to be out there talking about podcasts. They've, done hundreds of these. They know what that's like. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to suck at it. It's not going to be good." And there are a bajillion podcasts out there. There are a billion other things out there. How am I any Why would anyone want to listen to me?
When they say that, I'm like, you're going to be a great podcast guest. We've did some studies around this, and the best clients we've had have been introverts, right? And
Mm,
why? Because introverts tend to be more thoughtful. They have conversations. They excel at one-on-one conversations, right? And those are the people that are interesting on podcasts. If somebody just wants to come on and, you say, tell me about yourself, and 45 minutes later they're still talking, that's not an interesting conversation. In fact, it probably won't ever get published as a podcast. So if you start from the very beginning and it's like, what can I offer? What can I bring of value here? That's a great place to start, right? And like I said before, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. No, you're not going to be the perfect guest on every podcast, but you've got expertise that could help someone, some audience there. And really, it's the idea of finding that audience, going there to add value. And especially if you're using it for, what we talk about podcast interview marketing, leveraging other people's audience to get that know, like, and trust to grow your brand and grow your business. That is a powerful way to do it. And is your first interview going to be bad? Sure. Just like, the first time you played golf was bad, the first time you did anything, but you learned from that. And there are things that you can do. There are resources out there that people will help you with that, right? You're not reinventing the wheel here. There's a way to do it.
yeah, and I think Neil Seaman was a guest on Paper Napkin recently, and he talked about how businesses, leaders need to elevate quiet experts within their organizations because that's where the innovation lives. I mean, these quiet experts are the ones in the back of the room who don't share openly unless they're invited, right? So flipping that around, if you're the person looking to be invited, what do you do? What does that look like, Tom?
Yeah, and I love the quiet experts. I've never heard that term. I've heard them referred to as humble heroes, and I think they do better than the carnival barker, right? I think to where to start is, what are your goals with it, right? What are you trying to accomplish? It's like with the conversation. What's this conversation supposed to be? Who do I want to talk to? Right? The whole world doesn't want to hear you. So figure out who you want to talk to, and then going back again to conversations, not automation. I hear people say, well, here's my dream 100 or dream 1000 podcasts. Now, why don't you find five that would be ideal, right? And listen to the podcast, leave it a rating and review, right? Hosts always listen to that. Share their social media, make a comment, right? Gary Vaynerchuk talks about jab, 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 right hook. I look at it as give, 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 ask. So if you give the rating and review, if you've shared their content on social media, if you connected with the host on LinkedIn, then you can reach out and say, I was listening to the podcast and I've got something that could help your audience. I've got an insight. Now you're giving, they'll ask you to be on the podcast, right? It's not, I just wrote a new book and I want to use and abuse your audience. No, that's not what anybody wants. And the thing is people will say, well, that's not scalable. Really? So if you do that for 5 podcasts and say you get invited on 2 of them and you do a good job. And at the end of that podcast interview, after they stop recording, you ask the host, I really enjoyed this. I'm trying to benefit more people. Do you know any other podcast hosts that you think I could bring value to? Hint, podcast hosts, no podcast hosts, right? And so if you do a good job and every host gives you 2 introductions, within within a short time, your dance card will be filled there. So once again, you had mentioned something at the beginning, and I think it's genius, right? We go from contact to conversations to relationships. And so it's the same way in podcast interview marketing. And you can work with agencies to do this and tap in on their relationships and expertise, but don't feel like you've got to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think profit favors action, right? I mean, the bottom line is you've got to move. You just do. Start with one. Abundance starts with one. Profit favors action. Just have one conversation. And if you can commit to one, maybe you can commit to a second one, right? Isn't that where it starts?
It does. And I like how you said action, but often I'll find myself, I'll say this. I was very busy. I took a lot of actions, right? I cleaned up the CRM. I did this. I found the all the misspellings on the website. I built this automation. It's like, wow, did you talk with any customers?
Yeah.
No, right? So I was busy, I was active, but I wasn't effective, right? And today it's getting easier and easier to be effective. I'm sorry, efficient at things that are less effective. So we really need to make sure we're taking the right activity too.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have a conversation, the first place to have a conversation is with a client. One of the things that I like to try to remember is the sun rises and sets every day with your clients. And if you have a conversation, sunrise, at the beginning of the day with one of your clients, and you finish your day with a conversation with a client, then you will have had a good day because you will have had two conversations.
Yeah.
And if you do that every day, and then maybe you have more than two, it builds and it builds and it builds. Sunrise, sunset, every day. Make it happen. And that's not hard to do, right? We're just talking about two conversations to start with and grow from there.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that. One of the phrases we used to use in the Navy was you have to know right answer when told. And that is so important in business too, because I can think when we first started out here, right, the best piece of fiction I've ever read or written was my business plan, right? All the graphs went up into the right, and then you start testing it with clients, and they'll tell you what they love and what they loathe. Interview Valet was supposed to start out with this cheesy little PDF book and a course. And I never took the course out of beta because the clients that were honest with me. They're like, listen, I don't want to learn how to do this. I just want you to do it. I mean, to the point where one of the beta testers came up and said, you should call the agency Interview Valet. I bought the domain. I'll give it to you. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do an agency. He's like, well, you're not helping anybody with this cheesy little course. Oh, okay.
That's amazing, right? Again, your customers, your clients, customers are transactional clients, these long-term relationships that build you referrals, these people actually care about you. And the way that they express that would only come across in a conversation. It doesn't come through a funnel.
Yeah.
You can't pound that through a funnel. It doesn't work, right? That's amazing. Uh, Tom, I know that we could go for a while longer. I think it's amazing, and I really appreciate everything you've shared. Is there anybody, one of the things that we're doing to spread kindness and spread good momentum around the internet world and in the podcast world is ending each podcast with a shout out. Do you have anybody you want to shout out today?
What came to mind is uh, Captain Bill Hayden, who was the one that taught me what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. Now, he went on to become Admiral Bill Hayden, but I knew him when he was the skipper of the USS Abraham Lincoln, right? And we were on the aircraft carrier there, and I was a nuke downstairs, below decks, running the nuclear power plants. It was just a job. It was normal to me. There were other people that were up there, flying fighter jets. And it's like, oh, that's amazing. To them, it was just a normal job. And he was the one that pointed out to me, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And I will ever be grateful for them. I've kept in touch with them over the years on that. He's a great guy. He's down in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Bill Hayden is awesome.
Well, thank you, Admiral Hayden, for that beautiful message because it's something that I've underlined and circled in our notes today. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.